Could I please invite the members of the new panel to come up on stage? So it's my pleasure to introduce. Yeah, in the same seating, over there. Thank you. We have Jan Moström, the president and CEO of LKAB. We have Emanuel Proença, who's the CEO of Savannah Resources. Cedric Duclos, the CEO of Saft. Mika, Seitovirta, the chief regional officer Europe for Sibanye Stillwater. Alberto, Castronovo, head of the internationalization unit at the Ministry of Enterprises and Made in Italy. And MEP and EPP coordinator for the ITRI committee, Ehler. Welcome to you all. Now, the first thing I would like to get clear is that now we are talking about all the stuff that is in the new political cycle priorities. It's the Draghi report, the innovation gap. It's about keeping industry in Europe reindustrializing, not deindustrializing. And what we've taken as a theme for this particular session is the battery value chain. And with sort of due acknowledgement to Cedric, I'm going to make the point that batteries are more than cars, right?
Right.
There, I've got that point across. We are very strong on industrial batteries, and all the batteries that relate to the transport of one shape or form, we're there. We don't have to worry so much about the Chinese being leap years ahead of us. But let's take a look, value chain-wise, at the issue here. So, first, very short introduction. Just introduce your company and what you're doing in relation to the battery value chain.
Thank you. I'm representing LKAB, and we are an iron ore company, but we also have quite a substantial footprint in industrial minerals. So where are we in the battery chain? Yes, you can say we are encycling it by producing steel or iron for steel. But we also are developing REs, those critical materials necessary after the batteries into the electric motors.
Thank you very much. Emanuel.
Emanuel Proença, I'm representing Savannah Resources. We're the owner of a concession that has by far the most interesting lithium assets, one of the two most interesting lithium assets in Europe. It's in northern Portugal, and we're ready to put it to operation over the coming 2 years. We have already invested more than 60 million euros into the project, 100% our own money from our shareholders, more than 4,000 shareholders that we have in the company. We're listed in the London Stock Exchange, and we're very proud to be part of this battery value chain that is being built as we speak in Europe.
And if I'm not mistaken, you've been selected as a strategic project, right?
Correct.
Correct. Cedric.
So, in Saft, we've been making batteries for 107 years, so seems to be a well-kept secret, but we do make a lot of batteries in Europe and across the world. We're a $1.5 billion revenue company. We have 16 facilities around the world and about 5,000 employees. So we've been making batteries for a long time, different electrochemistries that range from nickel, cadmium, primary lithium, all the way to lithium-ion. The first ever lithium-ion battery launch in space was the Saft batteries. That's 20 years ago. So it's not only Chinese. The thing is, we've been falling asleep in Europe and the Western world in general regarding batteries, letting China create an ecosystem around batteries. But we do have the knowledge, we do have the capabilities to do that, but we have to address the whole supply chain issue.
Thank you. And Mika, you don't look South African or sound South African. What are you doing?
Look, thanks, Peter. Maybe first about Sibanye Stillwater's. We are a multinational mining and metals processing company. And we are listed in Johannesburg and New York. And currently, we are diversifying not only geographically, we have the Stillwater mines in US, and we have a quite big metal recycling business in US. But we are also coming to Europe and at the same time diversifying product-wise, because we are entering battery metals. We have 2 strategic projects here in Europe. We have a lithium hydroxide project, including the mine, the concentrator, and the refinery in Finland, called Keliber, which is planned to be ramped up next year in production as the first one with the own ore in Europe. And the second strategic project is in France. We have a nickel refinery. We are currently doing feasibility studies. We call the project Gallicam, and we try to repurpose that refinery to precursor production.
Thank you very much. And now we turn more to the public sector. Alberto, what's the role of your ministry in the critical raw materials story?
Yeah. You could ironically say we are trying to mine.
I'm sorry, did I make? I just asking Alberto.
Me, so I was confused. So please.
No. Okay. Should I go?
Yes, please.
Okay. Thank you, Peter. The name of our ministry, we are the Ministry of Enterprises. So automotive sector is one of the industry that we are following. Of course, as you know, automotive is crucial for the Italian industry. And as for the CRM activity, this is a cross-competence between our ministry and the Ministry of Environment and Energy Security. And we are working on the Italian strategy on critical raw material, starting from the new mining law that was issued just last May. And we are also working on the financial side, settling and not settling, we have settled the Italian strategic fund for critical raw material with 900 million euros of initial installments. And of course, now we are involved in the strategic projects and all the partnership with all the other member states.
Thank you. And thank you. Christian, the European Parliament plays an incredibly important role in all this. What would you like to say by way of opening remarks?
I mean, you could ironically say we are mining in the Bermuda Triangle between competitiveness, sustainability, and the climate ambitions. And I think the reprioritization of that is the job so far. Because, I mean, let's be honest, I mean, a lot of the battery market is driven by the public sector decision to reduce substantially CO2. I mean, we need that for buffers and so. At the same time, we have this kind of parallel phenomenon that in the last term and for the last 10 or even 15 years, we never balanced between the climate ambition and sustainability ambitions, which is a certain contradiction, which we didn't admit. And the question how that relates to the competitiveness of the European economy in more general terms. But in practical terms, I mean, we had been working on net zero, on the Critical Raw Materials Act. We are going to see that there might be a resilience fund coming up, which is addressing some of this issue. So in that kind of questions, how to reprioritize, that might be the job for that term.
Thank you very much. Now I'm going to thank you for that first round. We're going to get into a bit more of a thematic discussion now, and I'm going to approach it from the value chain perspective, starting with the beginning, the mining, then the refining, and then the battery cell manufacturing. So maybe the best place to start would be with you, Emanuel, because you're strictly a mining project. Excuse me. And the question is really around, first of all, how you manage what customers are expecting from you with the regulatory pressures that you have on your back as well, and how you are addressing the question of new battery technologies emerging.
Sure. So it's 3-4 topics. Let me try to make it simpler at start. First one, regulation. We don't manage regulation. We comply with it. So there's no real discussion there. We have to comply with regulation, and we will. I'm very proud to say that our project has become much stronger through the process of being permitted. Okay, it has become much sounder in terms of environmental compliance, in terms of respect for the region, in terms of the quality of the delivery in itself, and so on and so forth. So that is a given. We will comply with all of that, and we will execute a project that is a benchmark for the industry, I would say, globally. And I would say that probably Caliber's project and a few of the other projects in the panel represented here are doing exactly the same. There is a consequence to that, and that consequence needs to be accounted for, but it doesn't fully connect to our clients. Our clients, what they want us is to deliver. They want us to be able to get the product onto the market as soon as possible. That's all. That's all that is important for them, and that's all that is important for the European battery value chain, is that we have feedstock available as soon as possible to feed this whole industry, to de-risk the other steps of the value chain, and it needs to be competitive at the same time. And we're lucky because we can comply with regulation at the same time that we can be competitive. And why is that? Because we have a very good resource. This is not transposable to all the projects. We need to compete with global projects at more or less at the same time that our project started to be developed, close to 10 years ago now. A project in Brazil started to be developed, Sigma, owned by Sigma, a company that is also listed, and they are now in production. Okay. They are now in production. They have spent slightly above $100 million to get a plant operating and running that is similar to ours. We're going to spend $280 million to execute, and they're delivering to customers. So what is essential for us is that we ensure that we get the ball running as soon as possible, and it would be interesting for the regulators who are ensuring that we have a great project, that they also bring the other elements of value to the table, because when I'm asking for more capital to my shareholders, I'm competing with their alternative to be placing their money into Sigma or other projects globally. Last question was on technology, and for that one, we're in a privileged position, I would say. When you're producing a lithium mineral, you know that lithium is number 3 in the periodic table, right? And you know that sodium is number 9 in the periodic table. You also know that all the chemistries that you have today that are solid growers in the system rely on lithium. And you also know that semi-solid and solid state will rely on lithium even more than all the others. So there is not a question of, do I need to adjust my plan? Do I need to change? No, I just need to execute, and I need to make sure I execute as fast as possible so that everything else in the industry develops.
Thank you very much. Excuse me. Jan, you're both in the mining and the refining business. Same question to you.
I would start with the mining, basic for mining. You know, mining is, one part is geology. It's about mineral resources. And there you have to understand geology, geometry, and find out what type of minerals, metals are in the bedrock. The important part is mineral reserve, how you transform this from geology to economics. That means that you have to prove that it will be profitable to mine this deposit. You have two important parts in that, and quite easy, it's cost and revenues. Cost, one part which you have to offset is the complicated and very bureaucratic way of develop a mine, which means that you have to comply with a lot of legislations, you have to do an environmental permit process, complicated, but you have to come through it. Then you have to develop mining method, technology, processes, the market, and understand it, and do a calculation. This will it cost to mine this deposit? Then you come to the important part, what are the revenues? Generally, you have to bring long-term assumptions showing the price assumptions throughout the mine life. And generally, we talk about mine life in decades, 10, 20, 30, 40 years. Generally, you apply long-term assumptions that are on the global level. But now we have the problem, if we can really rely, or we do not want to use the global price setting, we want to have a regional price setting. How will we comply with that? But if you really want to create a really competitive value chain, I think you have to work in the different perspectives. What we've been doing, I would say, since it was founded back in 1890, one part of the value chain is that we are collaborating with the majority of world-class suppliers to the mining industry, because the most important part is how to make a competitive mine. If you have a competitive mine, then you also have a competitive processing, so you can all the time adapt to the market, to your customers' demand. Then you will be competitive. And the most important part in a resilient value chain, regardless where you are in the value chain, that it's competitive and it's profitable. If it's not competitive and profitable, you will not have a resilient value chain. So what's important for our parts is how to deal with the really more and more difficult bureaucratic process of getting permits, comply with reporting, develop new technologies, methodologies with world-class suppliers to the mining industry. But what really will be important, what will we calculate on the revenue side? Because that is defining the value of the reserve.
Thank you very much, Jan. Mika, you're more or less in the same space in terms of position in the value chain. Same question goes to you.
Thank you, Peter. Maybe I take a little bit different angle on this one. I would like to comment with a few words the permitting process and the administrative process after that, if you get appeals. First of all, nothing against the permitting process as such, because it's so important, and obviously we want to do responsible mining, so nothing there. However, it's not predictable today. So you get surprises, like how much sulfates can you have in your wastewater, as an example. And we get continuously new norms. Like in our case, so we have less sulfates in our wastewater than what we have in our drinking water in Finland. Does it make sense? You know, it's a difficult question here. But it needs to be more predictable, because this kind of unit that could treat the new demands costed us 70 million euros. So it's not a small thing when we are talking about whether the project will be profitable or not. The second thing is that, and I think we have even more to do there, it's the appeal process. Because, of course, anybody can appeal, and that's okay. It's part of the system. However, the quality of the appeal doesn't really have a meaning. It could be anyone with just anything. So we have been appealed with an appeal which is not even within the scope of the permitting, what we are searching. And still it takes a long, long time. Again, you come back to profitability and investors' patience, because it might end up very badly, because you have another year, you know, when you can't do actually anything. It might be also a question of resources in different countries, but it's clearly an issue here that needs to be solved so that we get the investments done.
Thank you very much. So we've had mining, we've had refining. Where does this stuff go? It goes into the battery manufacturing. So Cedric, I'm going to add another question on top of the two I already put. Where does the long-term industrial competitiveness come in when you're trying to address the security of supply? But you can also take the new battery technology question as well.
Yeah. Well, that's a very good question. So at the end, we have to be very, very realistic and pragmatic about what we're talking about. The world's going electric for environment reasons and other things, right? So we need to make those batteries, and to make those batteries, it's a very complex industry that requires a lot of raw materials. If you look at how we address it today, when we want to make a gigafactory in Europe, take in the automotive world, what do? We buy Chinese machines, we buy Chinese raw material, use Chinese technicians, and we put all that together and we have a so-called European battery. So it's full dependency. So we're competing with a country that has integrated along the entire value chain. We can talk about the raw material, lithium, and others, but take one simple example, graphite, which is used on the anode, the negative side of a battery. 99% of graphite refining in the world is made in China. So if we want not to displace the problem and end up making on European side a battery that's fully dependent on something coming from somewhere else, be it the material, be it the machines, we have to build this value chain. I fully agree with my colleagues. First of all, we need long-term commitment and support. We can't have 10 years to get permitting and develop a project. And if we do that, we address that, stop sprinkling money all around, pick the winners, because otherwise we disperse the effort and we're not going to build a resilient value chain. And there's plenty of projects. We have to support people like Emanuel, like the folks in Targa in Sweden who do a fantastic job with graphite, and build this value chain. Otherwise, again, we'll have only displaced the problem. So this needs to be a committed effort with committed players in Europe, and stop over-regulating the industry to death, because this is what really drags us today, and it will be very difficult to build a competitive model in front of a country that has heavily subsidized its industry for a very long time and has a 10-year lead on the topic. So I think we have the ingredient, but we have to line them up in a very pragmatic approach so we do build the whole value chain and not only a piece of it.
This vertical integration is where the Chinese have really cracked the model of how to build a dominating position in the marketplace. We may need to come back to that, but I'm going to turn now, Christian, for a broader perspective. Two real questions for you. What's the one thing that Europe really needs to do to succeed in this race to 2030, which is the overall topic of this conference? And how do you think Europe and the member states should be reacting to all of this trade measure turbulence coming out of the US, tariffs, safeguards, etc., export restrictions coming out of China?
I mean, what we're going to see is that there will be, I mean, that's very general compared to what you had been elaborating, but what you're going to see is a reprioritization of the common market. I mean, we're becoming lazy in the 2000s because that growth was on the international market. The political setting of the international market was done, so you wouldn't have to politically invest so much. I mean, we saw a little bit of protectionism, a little bit fights on WTO, but in principle terms, we said, okay, growth comes from global markets. The internal market had been also said, although we are a little bit ignoring that 60% of exports of member states go into the internal market, but we didn't care much. We didn't succeed on the service market. We didn't deepen the market. We didn't care about the infrastructure of the market. So what you're going to see is a refocusing to some extent on the internal market, and that will be accompanied also by instruments. I'm a little bit careful in terms of picking winners and losers. I think that had been a concept which was very sympathetic for politicians because they have the impression that they could do. In practical terms, it permanently failed. So I think what we should do is we should consider what are the costs of resilience to make strategic decisions. There you're going to see that we will build up the financial instruments for that. There will be a bank on investments on CO2 reduction, strategic investments, but in more general terms, the problem is how to make the market attractive, and that will be, and that's painful for German to say. I mean, we'll immediately go now in the discussion after the summer about the capital market in the Union. I think the fragmentation of the capital market doesn't attract global capital. It makes the transaction costs costly. It's also fragmented in terms of the regulatory framework. There, I think we had been starting well. I think that the CBAM, the Critical Raw Materials Act and the Net Zero Act had been, for the first time, shattering the limitations of subsidiarity, because that everyone could hide behind. You know, the union could say, okay, we somehow rule the market, but if it comes to the permitting framework, all that. It's more or less member states. Member states have been saying, okay, we do that on our own, but there's no common approach. And I think we showed for the first time that the two levels were willing to engage in a more coherent way, that we resort the priorities between, as I said, been saying, sustainability, so environmental laws, the competitiveness question, and the question of CO2 reduction. And the priorities are now, we do CO2 reduction, there we go on. It would be devastating if we would now stop, but we really have to rebalance, and we have to have a very, very complicated discussion with our citizens that doesn't come, that it doesn't come with a price. And the price will be that we have to restrain on some of the sustainability criteria, or quite practical things. I mean, for example, the idea of representative action law is a disaster. The idea of that we go for individual species instead of looking to species if we come to environmental law. I mean, we had been practically closing the door, and that door is now going to open again, but it will be a painful process.
Thank you very much, Christian. And Alberto, Italy is very good at the whole recycling piece of the puzzle, and I think you've actually got some strategic projects identified in that space. And my question to you, you may say a word about them, but my question to you is, when we're doing this circularity and recycling, how do we make sure that the value stays here in Europe and that it contributes to a more circular, for example, automotive value chain?
Yeah, okay. Yeah. As we all know, the European Commission has approved the first list of 47 strategic projects under the Critical Raw Material Act. And among these, 4 Italian projects have been approved specifically on the recycling phase. They are in rare earths, lithium, nickel, and cobalt. And all of them are related to the automotive industry. As this is a traditionally strong industry in Italy, as we know. So Italy is in a good position to gain from and contribute to these projects because of its well-established automotive sector, as we said, and its leadership in circular economy initiatives. We have introduced 9 projects to the Commission, and 7 of these were in the recycling phase. Then 4 of these have been approved. The emphasis on recycling is in line with the national strategy to foster circularity in important industrial sector and expand markets for secondary raw materials. But this will also have a broader impact on more than in Italy, I mean, because these projects are designed to strengthen the European supply chain, reduce dependence on imports, and support the green and digital transition by ensuring a sustainable supply for CRMs, especially for batteries and electrical vehicles. The promising results from this first selection of strategic projects underline both the EU's and Italy's commitment to advancing CRM recycling, particularly in automotive applications, reinforcing Italy's industrial strengths and supporting broader European strategic goals. Coming to your question, what's to be done to build a strong value chain in the EU? I believe that building strong value chain in the EU that effectively integrates recycled critical raw material is vital for ensuring the competitiveness of both the raw material sector and key downstream industry like automotive, balancing circular economy principles, strategic investments, and regulatory coherence. I've highlighted 4 priorities to build a strong EU value chain, and in certain way has been highlighted also from Bernd Schäfer in his opening remarks. The first one is strengthen circular economy practices by boosting recycling infrastructure, as we are trying to do in Italy, or incentivizing secondary material use. Diversifying supply chains by reducing import dependency, and by developing domestic market. Here the CRM Act gives us some important tips on this. Support strategic project and innovation, funding R&D and leverage public-private partnerships, and address energy and cost challenges, mitigating energy costs and introducing green premium mechanism. To conclude, the European Union has a strategic opportunity to lead globally in circular critical raw materials and clean value chain. This requires, from my point of view, an holistic alignment, regulatory certainty, cross-sector collaboration, bold investment in technology and infrastructure, and a circular mindset embedded in industry and policy. Doing so, we will not protect only the automotive sector from source shocks, but also generate jobs, innovation, and resilience across the EU economy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alberto. So now we can take some questions from the public. Let me just first ask the tech team, are there any questions that have been posted in the app? If there are, I'd like to see them on the screen here. If not, then I'd like a bit of light. Who would like to ask a question to this panel? Any hands? Come on, you can't be that desperate for lunch. It'll be there. Yes, right. Microphone for the lady on the third row, please. If you could stand up and introduce yourself and then ask your question, please.
Yes, my name is Karin Tinelius and I work for Sibanye Stillwater. I would like to hear from the panelists, what are your take on how we can improve the European competitiveness by policies?
Right, we're not going to give that to Sibanye Stillwater to answer.
I'm ready to answer.
Who's a taker for that one? Cedric.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting the way you phrase the question, that you associate competitiveness to policies. So, look, we've got a recent example about how we approach that with the US IRA and the European response to it. So, the US IRA was a very practical approach to a very practical question. How do we make sure we increase our ability to produce on American soil, right? So there were two sub-chapters, 48C and 45X. We benefited from this. We jumped into it. We produced. We got the tax credit right away, right? So that's very practical. In Europe, we started to explain to people what they could not do, and if they were meeting those criteria, then maybe they would be eligible to this and that. So the first thing, if you want to know how policies can improve competitiveness, is reduce policies or make them simple. Today, if you want to apply to an average European program, you spend between 500 and 1,000 man-hours just to apply, right? That's a 4 to 6 months work to gather the information, make sure you get the clearance and all that stuff. That just doesn't work, right? We don't build an industry that is in an urgency of facing a very tough competitive issue with this type of thing. So we need very practical approach, pick the winners, focus your energy and your attention and your incentives of those winners with getting rid of the burden that is imposed to them so they focus on what they know how to do, which is not paperwork, it's producing and developing technology. I think if we're able to do that, then we'll have a very different landscape, very different scenario, and we'll be able to compete.
Let me just react on that, if I may, stepping out of role for a second. I read this morning that the American Congress is proposing to eliminate all of those tax credits for all of these clean technology industries. So the whole demand side is going to get axed in the US quite abruptly. But Emanuel, you wanted to come in on this.
Yeah, just I would add a few things. You referred in the previous panel the role of bureaucrats, and we sometimes put a burden into the word, and I think that we put the burden into the word because there is a misconception. I think that the most successful bureaucrat is the one that assures that the results are achieved. right? It assures that the results are achieved in the manner that we want to, but it assures that the results are achieved, right? And so focus needs to always be on action and on execution, on making sure that things happen, right? And for that, as Cedric was saying, you require a model that allows action to happen. It has to be simple, it has to be clear, it has to be implementable as fast as possible. We have also talked about the CRMA this morning, and we will continue to talk about the CRMA. My view, it's a great piece of legislation that was passed in record time, but it was 2 years ago. It was 2 years ago. We are working and competing against a set of competitors that do things. The Chinese define a target for the coming 10 years, and within year 5, they have complied with that target. Within year 6, they have overcome it. We cannot be thinking about, in 2025, we cannot be thinking about how we get to the target of 2030. We need to think about how, in 27, we have results on the streets that allow the whole system to move faster so that 2030 target is as easy as possible and that it can be overcome. Because on top, the CRMA was a great piece of legislation, but in some of the targets, it set targets that were low because Europeans were thinking that they were not able to get there. Right? There was a conception there that was like, this is perhaps already a bit too much. It would be better if it was twice or 3 times as much. Talking about the feedstock itself, we have a 10% target for lithium. Well, if Calibre does the work right, and they're doing it, if we do it right, between ourselves, the two of us, we'll probably be very close to 10% in Europe. So let's get the ball rolling. Let's get things done. Let's get things to happen, right? And at the same time, let me get back to my previous point. If I was coming to Cedric and telling him, look, Cedric, I have a great project. It is in Europe. So instead of $100 and something million, it has cost me $280 million, but it has a closed water circuit, it backfills, it does all of those things and everything all together. I am proud of the project, but do you want to pay me more? Will you pay me more for this? So who's bearing the burden? Because I am competing for capital against my global competitors, and we want a European industry to be as competitive as possible versus the rest of the world. We don't want to be doing the benchmark industry that then derails because it's not competitive versus the rest of the world. So it's all has to be geared towards action, and all has to be geared towards we want to make it perfect. There's someone who needs to pay. We need to implement the measures possible to allow everything to be paid. Again, we are now getting very close to the moment we execute. We have already more than 60 million euros of investment done. This was all pure capital by our company, and it will be similar around the table. CRMA was 2 years ago. It's about time we have financing mechanisms on the table like the others have in their other systems, so that we can get the ball rolling as soon and as fast as possible for all of these projects and the many others that we want to succeed.
Thank you. Anyone else want to come in, or we take another question? Jan, you look like you want to say something.
Yeah, what I would say is that it's the non-coherent legislation and non-stable legislation, I would say. Going back to mining, it's extremely capital intensive. We have extremely long times when we have to put the return on investment. We talk about decades. And if we cannot rely on legislation regarding the long-term assumptions, then the investment will not come. We will be looking at global long-term assumptions, which means that we would not take into considerations environmental climate aspects as in the Union. So I would say non-coherent legislation and not stable legislation is the most dangerous thing, I would say.
Okay. Mika, and do you still want to come back? Yeah, Mika.
Maybe just to add a couple of things on that, because as you mentioned, these are very capital-intensive projects. We have 2 strategic projects and no revenues for the time being, but we have invested 1 billion euro already, just to give you an idea. And I think what Europe needs to do for the long-term competitiveness is to make sure that we support and also protect these projects that are strategic so that they are for sure successful. Just to give you an idea, nothing new, but I think it's very important to promote that there is a local content in the products for Europe. It's also important to look at tariffs and carbon passports. And I also think that the tools we have been talking about funding and so on, it's very important, but I also think that they should be more flexible. What I mean by that is that if you get a grant from Innovation Fund, we are the lucky ones, we got it. But it's 4 years in principle, the time that you have to do the job. You don't really know how permitting, appeal process, etc., how your feasibility study is going during that time. So it's very hard to say that everything is ready in 4 years if you do a proper job. And you need to do your homework before you can make these big investments. So that flexibility is for sure one area. The other one is also the ramp-up support for these projects, just to make sure that they are successful. We are entering a completely new industry here. We haven't done the chemistries earlier in Europe, and now there are going to be surprises, and we need to make sure that we have tools also for that. And it could be even that certain grants, for instance, would work in a way that already during the feasibility studies, you could use part of that. Huh? Just that you survive in the big investments.
Thank you. Did you still want to come in, or we move on?
No, I think that the question of competitiveness is really important, because if you have an fully open market, I mean, we spent a lot of time talking about tariffs lately and criticizing the tariffs, but if you're going to agree that you have to support those projects, they're going to take a long time, they're going to be more expensive, but at the same time, you have to compete on your own market with imports that are 20-30% cheaper. That just doesn't work, right? So we have to decide which side of the fence we want to be on. Either we commit long-term with the subsidies and the necessary protection to build a resilient industry where we build up our competitiveness, or we open the gate and then, we're not going to catch up those 10, 15 years we are behind with a more expensive product along the value chain, or a more expensive value chain all the way.
Thank you very much. Okay, let's close that one. There's a question on the screen here from Yvonne. I know Yvonne. Where is she? Hi, Yvonne. This is more from the ACP Secretariat perspective, and the question is one that's came up a lot during the negotiations on the Critical Raw Materials Act. Perhaps I'm going to ask Christian to respond first. It's in light of Europe's interest in retaining value through critical raw materials, how do you balance this with partner countries, particularly in Africa, that also want to retain more value locally? You want to take this one, Christian?
I mean, we have a very complex discussion with Africa for the moment. I've been recently attending, it's not directly related to critical raw materials, but it was accompanied by the discussion with Algeria on hydrogen. South Corridor, we want them to produce hydrogen, and they were looking to the Commission and to some of the keen colleagues and had been pretty much saying, isn't it a little bit of a post-colonialistic attitude that we are now supposed to produce your hydrogen, which you're not able to do in Europe? Let's be honest, specifically on raw materials, but also on mining, we might be forced to be less naive. This whole post-colonial debate in Europe, we were in a relatively robust setting protected by the Americans. Also in terms of deciding for political priorities which are unpleasant. Let's be honest, for example, if I saw the recent discussion on molybdenum, more or less molybdenum is owned by Russia, China and America. And we agreed that we don't look for strategic alliances. The whole Greenland debate is perceived in Europe as a somehow kind of exotic, Denmark-related, foolish American discussion. This is a very substantial discussion. Europe has any interest that Greenland stays in Europe. and not for the sake of the political unity of Denmark, simply because of the resources. And we have to have a much more realistic politics towards Africa. We have to offer them something. So the discussion will be, and it will be a painful discussion, for example, do we produce ferrofumes in Europe anymore? Or do we grant that production to shift to some African countries, but in return we get preferred access to raw materials, them producing hydrogen, so to the privileges of producing there at lower cost or by better a better kind of principle economic framework. So in a way, it is that we had been pretending that we are the virgin without lower body. And I think that is in relation to Africa going to change, because what happens was that the Americans didn't care so much about Africa. They had their proven privileges. I mean, in my constituency, we wanted to set up a production for ferromolybdene again. And the Americans substantially prevented that Riva, an Italian company, will produce that in Germany, because they said, you know, you get your molybdene, but it is between us, the Russians, and the Chinese. And you get it, but in terms of resilience or independence and so on, so don't muddle around. Riva got preferred access to steel quotas in the US in return of not producing molybdene in a European factory. So I think our attitude has to be more strategic, less naive, to stand in for painful discussions, because it might not be simply going along, let's say, the rule book of recent years that we are the goods and all the other ones are the not so goods, but still we have interest somehow. So this attitude has to be much more strategic. I'm, to be honest, a little bit careful, you might allow me that. I mean, it is not just that politics and environmental laws had been driving mining out of Europe. I mean, let's be honest, we had been also industry in terms of their own supply chains had been totally counting on David Pareto, and to some extent rightly so, for 20 years, that we have global markets and we produce things where they are the cheapest to produce. And this might end now. But on the other hand, to be honest, I mean, if you're saying picking winners and losers, I mean, look to Northvolt. I mean, the German government was going in when BMW got out. So, I mean, whether we the most clever ones to pick the winners and losers, I personally doubt. What we're going to do is we have to decide in public procurement, in terms of public spending, what is the price for resilience? And that is something we have to add to the market. But that we are now choosing on the markets who are the winners and losers, I doubt. And also public money is not meant for that. If Mrs. von der Leyen, who wants to have a global competitive fund of 350 million to throw that now all together, and then we have the big bazooka. I mean, the estimates for the transition of the European economy from Paribas are 2,500 billion euros a year. So this illusion that public funding is going to compensate that somehow is not going to work. We have to tack the price for resilience, and then we have to set the framework conditions. And that means more Europe and the fragmentation of regulation which is accompanying investments, and make Europe more attractive for international capital, but not by individual decisions. It is simply that we need a common union capital market. And that will be the painful discussion, and that will set the framework conditions, and not so much picking winners and losers by relatively limited public resources.
Thank you very much. I think one phrase jumps out to me is someone's got to put a value on resilience. Companies have to start putting that on, and also governments have to make the same value judgments. It's time for closing. Sorry, there's no more time for more questions, but I'm going to give the other members of the panel about a minute each no, that's not right, less than a minute, 30 seconds each really, to really say whether you think that Europe is on the right track with the competitiveness compass, the Draghi report, the Clean Industrial Deal, the industrial decarbonization, all this stuff that's coming down the road. Is it going to do what's needed? Is it going to do what's needed to make this critical raw materials security of supply more doable than it was in the past? Mika, let's start with you.
I would say that we are sort of on the right track. The agenda is there, but it's still a lot more words than doing. And I think we need to have more, not only more of the same, but also new ideas how we develop these markets. And at the same time, we need to do everything faster than before.
Thank you. Alberto?
Yeah, I mean, now we have a strong pipeline of strategic projects. As has already been said, now we need to build a financial value chain, a stronger financial value chain. Some governments are working on that. We have also the private sector, which is starting looking at this industry. But we need to create this new ecosystem that doesn't exist. I think this is focused now in the next weeks.
Thank you, Alberto. Cedric?
Yeah, I'll be the party killer. I'm not convinced we're on the right track. I think we're spending too much time talking and not enough time in action. So we need to be focused. We need to put all these words into action and let the market and the actors develop, listen to them so we can really act successfully, because other parts of the world are moving very fast, Asia, North America, and if we don't react, it's not going to work out.
Thank you for that reality check. Emanuel?
I'll clearly second action as the critical elements of this equation, but I'll just add two more messages. The first one on the doom side. Have we thought about the scenario in which we are not successful? Because we're talking about 15 million jobs in Europe between automotive and a bit of defense and so on. Have we thought about losing 15 million jobs in a decade or something like that? It's gigantic. It's gigantic. And so we need to get our act together and we need to act, and as fast and as soon as possible. On the positive side, we have all heard talking about how fast solar and wind have grown in the last decade. Well, BSS, battery storage systems, are growing faster. They're growing much faster. Okay? Battery storage systems are growing much faster. EVs are an absolute game changer, and all the industries that will unfold in robotics, in aviation, in drones, in defense, and so on and so forth rely on making sure that this room and these projects are as successful as possible, as fast as possible, so as to deploy the other elements of the value chain as soon as possible.
Thank you very much. And Jan, you have the honor of closing us down.
Thank you. It's a good start, but I would say it's too little and it's too slow.
Okay. Right. We have reached lunchtime. Can you please thank the panel for the interesting discussion?